Full disclaimer, I do not know everything, and if I am wrong on some things or other things, please let me know in the comments below. I appreciate everyone watching, and I hope I can give you guys the information that I at least know and understand. Alright folks, we're going to be covering the recipe manager system provided by DayZ. This system is quite glorious, and it has so many different kind of possibilities and combinations. In this video, we're going to be covering how to properly point to the folder structure so it will load it up, going over the basics of the recipe and what all of the bools, checks, and integers floats mean, as well as over its possibilities and other things you can do with it, including attachment checks and advanced smart recipes you can do by condensing down multiple recipes into one recipe. I hope you folks enjoy this video and find its content helpful. So to get started with making sure you have your recipes ready to go and to make the recipes, you need to have a basic folder structure in place. You need to have a Config.cpp which calls upon that folder structure to point to where the recipes are so the game knows where to make them. Now, in this example, we have the Config.cpp at the very beginning of the folder structure, but you don't necessarily need to have it, although I would recommend it in my opinion. Then you have your scripts folder. And then in here, you can see we have different folders in here. We're only going to be focusing on the for world. The other two are just for examples. If you ever go into another recipe mod or even into DayZ's recipes folders and you see this, you want to go into for world to find DayZ's recipes. But in this example, we're going to be using the for world as that's where you need to put your recipes. So in here we have our recipe generate, and this is where you register your recipes, which we will cover later. And then finally, you can have your recipes folder. So now that we know the basic structure, which is recipe, the main mod name, scripts, for world, and then recipes, we can do the rest. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Config.cpp. So folks, the Config.cpp is the way that you point your mod to the folders to load in your custom recipes as well as other scripts that belong in the so-called world module. All right, now here you can see a basic config.cpp created, but the most important thing to remember here is that in our dependencies we are calling world and we are doing our file path in our mod structure starting at the start of our mod structure name, scripts, and then for world. And what this does is it loads everything after for world into the world script module so we can load in our recipes. This is just a basic example. If you don't know how to use config.cpp's, you can look at this and learn from it, but we're going to go ahead and move on to our first basic recipe. Okay folks, so we're going to be going over a basic recipe and we're going to be explaining what everything inside a recipe does and its possibilities. So first off, you can see here that I have class craft basic recipe and extends recipe base. This is using the inheritance system, and if you don't understand the inheritance system, please see the video I made before. I would further like to let people know that this recipe is a .c file and it is inside of the for_world in a subfolder called recipes. Now, full-fledged warning, I understand that not everything can be 100% accurate, and I hope you folks understand that this is what I understand and what I know about the recipes. If you know anything more and you wish to correct me or let me know where I am wrong, please feel free to do so. But I hope this gives you a better understanding about how recipes work and the ability to make them better as well as use them in amazing ways. So let's go ahead and get started with the basic craft recipe. So now that we're getting started, I'd like to let everybody know that I have put comments next to most of these variables and checks so you know and can read about them if I talk too fast or if I go over something and you just maybe want to look at it over again. So let's go ahead and get started with that basic knowledge and understanding. So line number 5, m_name equal craft basic, and that's in quotations. This is the name and this is the display returned to the player when they go to make the recipe if the recipe is valid. This is very useful for letting players know what they're crafting as well as when you have multiple recipes discerning what does what. Further, next up is m_is instant recipe equal false. This allows you to do the recipe instantly without the animation. So if you were to click and drag something, it would immediately do that, or if you were to do the recipe on the ground, it would immediately do that as well. However, be warned that multiple items have many recipes registered to them, and by doing this, you can make it so people get frustrated when they instantly make a recipe when they were planning on making a recipe that wasn't the instant one. So just be warned about that. Next up is our animation length, which is line number 8, m_animation length equal to. This is how long it takes to do the recipe. So the closer it is to 0, the faster it is, and the closer it is to, the larger the number it is, the longer it takes. So that's pretty cool. So you can make this almost instantaneous if you were to make the number closer to 0, or you can make it take forever if you make the number higher than 2. It all depends on the situation. So number 10 is m_specialty equal 0. This is for soft skills. Now, closer to negative numbers equal more roughness, which is the lumber axe, which gets more logs and other things, and numbers above 0 are more precision, which is like you use less of your sewing kit when you're repairing your clothes and a couple of other things. I would suggest and recommend do not change this from vanilla or set it to 0. Soft skills are broken and they do not save, which can cause frustration upon people who do receive the soft skills, as well as there is a couple bugs and exploits with soft skills, so it's easier not to let people use them or have them. That's just my recommendation. So let's go ahead and cover the checks and balances part of it, which we are going to be going into. So I would like to direct your attention to line 14, which I just highlighted. You can see in square brackets, there's a 0 just before the equal. That number represents the first ingredient in the recipe. And then on line 22, you can see the same exact thing happening, where in square brackets, there's a 1 just before the equal in the highlighted line. Well, that means that that is the second ingredient. So that is how you identify what you're working with when you are working with it. Recipes only use 2 ingredients. Now there are ways to expand upon that, but for the basic recipe we are covering now and the checks and variables, we're just looking at this. So let's go ahead and cover the condition. So the first check we're going to be covering is line number 14. Line number 14 is m_min damage ingredient equal -1. Now -1 disables the check entirely, so it doesn't care. However, if you wish to have a check enabled, you can set this to a positive number. Now, sometimes this is very important because if you think about how people can't repair worn or pristine clothes or worn or pristine weapons, this is what that check does. It states that if the weapon has this much health, don't allow the recipes. So for example, if I were to set this to, let's say, 10, it would state that if the weapon's health is below 90 out of a max health of 100, so 90 health left, then you can enable the recipe. However, if the item is 91 health out of 100, disable the recipe. So this is very useful, again, for things like clothing or for weapons, when you don't want an item that is worn or pristine to be repairable. It's very, very nice. So further on going, we're going to go to line number 16, which is similar but not exactly the same. So line number 16, which is m_max damage ingredient equal 3, and you can use -1 to disable if you wish to, pretty much states that if the item has this health or below, disable the recipe. So any item in this example that has 3 or more health would be enabled as a recipe in here. So for example, again, let's consider clothing. Badly damaged clothing has 3 or more health, so of course it could be repaired. But if it was ruined, it could not be repaired, again, because it has less than 3 health. And that is what that line does. Moving on, we are going to line number 18, which is m_min quantity ingredient. This is a way for you to say the first ingredient has to have this much quantity. We're going to use small sticks for this example. If we were to set this to 4, the stack count on the sticks have to be 4 out of 5 because sticks stack to 5. So you'd have to have 4 sticks in your stack to be able to enable the recipe. And that is how that one works. Going to line number 20. It works kind of in the reverse situation. So line number 20, m_max quantity ingredients, you could set that to be 5. Now let's say there's a mod out there that allows the sticks to go up to, 20 in your inventory. You could state in your recipe, the sticks from line number 18 have to be 3, and on line number 20 have to be 5. And the recipe would be enabled if they had anywhere between 3 or 5 sticks. But if they have more than 5 sticks, line number 20 would disable the recipe. Now, that's not a great example, but you can make it so there are specific requirements, so you can make it so your recipe doesn't cause conflictions, which is a very useful thing. With update 1.18, they did, 1.17, my apologies. With the scroll wheel, they made accessing or finding recipes really easy when multiple ingredients have multiple recipes register them, but it's pretty basic that way. Now, line 22, 23, 25, and 26 are exactly the lines that I just explained above, except for they're for the ingredient 1 or the second ingredient in the recipe. So between the first ingredient, which is square bracket 0, you can set all your all your checks. And then down here, you can set all of your other checks. Now, what's important to remember is if your ingredient technically doesn't have any quantity in it, let's say, for example, it's a small stone. Well, small stones don't have a quantity, so you would want to disable the quantity checks on the secondary ingredient if it's a small stone. However, if it does have a quantity, you can have the first quantity and the second quantities checking with each other to enable the recipe or to disable the recipe. Very, very powerful stuff and stuff to remember. Please remember, the square brackets with the 0 in it is the first ingredient, and the square brackets with the 1 in it is the second ingredient. Now let's go ahead and cover the ingredients section of your recipe. So, we're going to cover the ingredients portion of your recipe. Now, these are the ingredients. So you have ingredients 1, and you have ingredient 2 down here. Now, I'm going to explain ingredients 1 because ingredients 2 is kind of a copy and paste of this. And we're going to be using the leather sewing kit and for our first ingredient, or the sewing kit for our first ingredient, and then the tanned leather. Now I'll explain how we can have 1 ingredients, even though technically it should only be just 1. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, folks, so as you can see here, we have our ingredients and our comments, and we have here our first ingredients. Now, as you can see on line 31, it says insert ingredients, and then it goes bracket 0, comma, quotations, and inside the quotations it says leather sewing kit with a semicolon at the very end. Now, that 0 is corresponding to the first ingredient, which is 0, as we talked about above with the conditions. Now, as you can see here, that the leather sewing kit is in quotations. That is the class name of the leather sewing kit. And you need to make sure that it is always the class name of the item you wish to use and it is spelled correctly. Furthermore, you can see here on line 32, we have a secondary first ingredient. How is that possible? Well, ingredients in recipes can have multiple classes or multiple items that can be used as the first ingredient. So, for example, this would be or, and then it would state that. So it could be a leather sewing kit or a sewing kit in this recipe for the first ingredient. This is very cool because vanilla uses this very well, and one of the best examples I have is if you look up at how to cut up clothes into rags, they use recipes, and the first ingredient has like well over 30 different options. So it's really expansive how many of the ingredients you can add to this and how expansive you can actually make it. Combined with the conditions and the classes that you can use, or you can use or statements, it can be quite diverse. Well, let's go ahead and get rid of this or statement and get started talking about the rest of this. So on line 34, we have m underscore ingredient add health 0 equals 0. 0 does nothing, okay, by the way. But if you were to make this subtract health, you would put a negative number there, or if you wanted to add health, you put a positive number there. This could be useful for making it so ingredients who don't have a quantity can eventually over time become ruined and can no longer be used in the recipe. Your choice. Or you can have it add health. Let's say you don't want a result in this recipe, and you can make it so if you combined tanned leather, a leather sewing kit with canned leather, it would add health to the ingredient. So the choice is yours on how these things work. Or let's say you do want a result, and you wanted a leather sewing kit plus tanned leather equals, a pants. But the rest of the leather that was left over somehow adds health to the leather sewing kit because you used it to patch it up. That's totally feasible as well. So that is how that one works. Now let's go ahead and cover number 36, or line 36, m underscore ingredient set health. Now this works kind of the same, but not exactly. -1 disables this, and this allows you to set the health for the ingredients. So if you used a leather sewing kit, and let's say the leather sewing kit has 100 health, you could say that this sets the health of the leather sewing kit at 50. Or it sets it at, 10. However, if you put a negative number here, it will always ruin the leather sewing kit, and it's not suggested. Oftentimes, I don't really find a lot of uses for this, as setting the health of the item is kind of counterproductive. I would rather add health to the item than set the health in reality. But to each their own. If you find a good case for this, put it down in the comments below. Let me know what you think. Going further on, let's go ahead and look at line 38. Line 38 is m underscore ingredient add quantity, and then it goes 0, and 0 does nothing. Doesn't add or subtract. However, this works almost exactly, if not exactly, like line 34, which it adds or subtracts quantity to the ingredients. So in this case, if we're using the leather sewing kits, I would want this to subtract from the leather sewing kit or the sewing kit to be able to make it so the sewing kits get used over time. And the way I would do this is just by setting a negative number where the 0 is. So this would be like -2 or -20, right? And that's basically how that works. Now let's go ahead and go to line number 40. This is the ingredient. So it says m underscore ingredient destroy 0 equal false. This means upon the completion of the recipe, will this destroy / delete the ingredient or not? If it's true, it does. If it's false, it does nothing, and then the other things above it, add quantity, sell health, add health, all come into focus and are possible. Then line 42. Again, I highly suggest you leave this as false. There is no reason to be using soft skills unless you actually think it should be, or you have a mod that allows the usage of soft skills to have fixed it. So in ingredient 2 down here, you can see that we have ingredient 2, and here we have just tan leather. Now technically you could put like, the same as above with the insert ingredient 0. This is insert ingredient 1. And then as you can see down below here, every single one of its variables and, bools all have 1 in brackets. And that means that is ingredient 2, but technically it's ingredient 1. Everything always starts at 0 most times in code. So it counts up 0, 1, 2, 3, so on. But yeah, that's the thing. And then I didn't put any comments here because technically we just covered all of the same stuff. It's just this now all applies to only the tanned leather. So for example, if we wanted the tan leather to be -2 because we're making our pants, that would consume 2 of the tan leather in the stack and not destroy the entire stack if you had 20. So the stack would go from 20 to 18, for example. Next up we're going to be covering is the results, which is what you're going to get when you complete the recipe. Alright, so let's go ahead and cover the results area. So the result area is quite interesting because it doesn't exactly 100% work as the insert ingredient lines we had above, where we can just do a insert ingredient and go OR. We would have to do something else. Now I'll cover that after I explain the rest of the variables or bools inside of this. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So line 55, it says add result, and then brackets, it goes quotations, and then it says the class name. Again, this is the class name of the item that we wish to create. So upon the completion of the animation, which we saw above in the very top, this would give us a leather storage vest underscore natural. Again, that is the class name. However, we have some things that we need to cover to see how it gives us the result and what condition it is, the health, and other things as well. So in line 57, we have m underscore result set full quantity, and it says 0. Now this 0 does not apply to the first ingredient. It applies to the first result here. And as you can imagine, when I add another result, it would be square brackets 1 here. Again, this does not apply to the ingredient above. This is its own area in its own handling. So as you can see here, it says equal false. Now, false means that it doesn't do anything, but true, however, sets it to full quantity, full health, and it's pristine, and it has its full status bar or full stack. That's something to be aware of if you want something to be worthwhile. So, for example, if you wanted it to be no matter what condition the sewing kit is and no matter what condition the tan leather is in, that it gives you a pristine health vest, you would set this to true. However, if you don't, you would have this set to false. Moving on to line 59. So 59 is m underscore result set quantity. And again, this is equal to 0 because this is the first result, which is the leather storage vest underscore natural. And this says -1. -1 doesn't do anything. However, if you were to set this to, let's say, 2, and let's say the leather storage vest had a quantity of 100, this would give it 2 out of 100 quantity. So as you can see here, this allows you to set the quantity of the spawned-in item. For a better example, if you were to the result were to create a sewing kit, and the sewing kit had a max of 100, you could have this set it to be like 75 out of 100, or whatever you want it to be. So this is just something to be aware of. Moving on to line 61. This sets health. This is much like the ingredient set health, and you can have it set the health of the item, so you don't have to worry about this. Again, -1 does it disables this entirely, so you wouldn't have to worry about it setting the health to a specific thing. It would just handle it on its own. So if you don't set the health of it, well then how do you manage the health of it? Well, there is a cool option, which is right here, and it's line number 63, and it's called m underscore result inherits health. Now, this is kind of complicated, so I'm going to try to explain it in my best way possible. So, this allows you to say that if I combine these ingredients, it takes the health of those ingredients, and then my result is a average of those two health ingredients of that health. So if I were to take a badly damaged sewing kit and badly damaged tan leather, it would probably give me a badly damaged leather storage vest, for example. So -1 does nothing, period, just nothing. However, if it is greater or equal to 0, that means that the result will inherit the health from the ingredient number value, right? If the value is equal -2, or rather equal -2 as we have here, then that result will inherit the health from all ingredients averaged overall. So let's say, for example, I wanted this to only inherit the health of my thing. So what I would do is, for ingredient 1, I would go here and I would change the equal to a greater symbol, and then I would say 0, right? Because the leather sewing kit is ingredient 0. So with this now, that means that it will inherit the health of the leather sewing kit when I make the leather storage vest. But if I wanted it to inherit the health of the tanned leather vest, it would be to 1. So if I wanted the leather storage vest to be the same health and damage state as the tan leather, that's what I would do. I would do greater than to 1. Now, if I wanted it to be the average of both of the things, I would set it to -2. Now, this is kind of confusing because the example they give is a greater than symbol equal to 0, which is, it fools you, because if you look at like -2, it says equal. So what they have done is they have removed the second equal that you normally would put in something and just made it so it only has one equal sign. So then you would change it to greater than, or you would change it back to equal. And that's how that works. But to go over this again, this allows you to state whether it averages between all of the ingredients, or pulls the health from one ingredient, or just doesn't do either one. So that's an important thing to remember. Now, going down to line 65, which is m_result inherits color. This is how they have one recipe, but when you cut up a yellow raincoat, it gives you a yellow armband, and when you cut up a red raincoat, it gives you a red armband. That has to do with in the Config.cpp for the raincoats, there is a insert or a variable there that allows them to declare what color it is. So in this case, this would state that because the armband is named, has that variable inside of its config.cpp called yellow, and the yellow raincoat has the same exact thing, when it cuts up the raincoat, this comes into play, line 65, and says, hey, ingredient 1 has the variable in the config.cpp called yellow, and the result right here has the same variable in its config.cpp, which is the yellow armband. So I'm going to give them a yellow armband. But if it was a red raincoat, it would give you a red raincoat. That's more advanced, and that's something that we would cover in another thing when we're talking about how to use the color system in DayZ to better benefit your situations. So moving on, let's go ahead and talk about line 67. Line 67 is m result to inventory, and it goes equal -2. Well, -2, the result will spawn on the ground. However, if you were to set it to -1, it will spawn anywhere in the player's inventory. And if you were to put the greater sign, it would switch with the ingredient number. Again, let's go ahead and cover this so you better understand. So the default is -2, which makes it spawn on the ground. If I wanted to spawn in my inventory, I would set this to -1. But what if I wanted to switch places with the ingredient that I'm doing? Let's say I wanted to switch places with the tanned leather. Well, the tanned leather is ingredient technically integer 1, right here, right? So if I have the result inventory greater than, and then it goes or equal to 1, then it will switch the leather storage vest, vest_natural, with the tan leather. Now, do keep in mind, I would suggest that if you aren't going to be consuming the secondary ingredient, or rather destroying it, that you leave this to either be -1 or -2. and set this back to equal. Now, if you are consuming the ingredient that you wanted to switch with, go for it. It's totally awesome to do so. So let's go ahead and cover number 69. This is, again, m_result use soft skills equal false. This allows for the modification of the soft skills. Again, I would stay away from this. Soft skills are broken and they can cause some glitches or unforeseen things, as well as most times upon player relogs or server restarts and stuff, players lose it anyway, so it's not much of a thing. So now moving on to our final results variable, which is line number 71. Number 71 goes m_result replaces ingredient equal to -1. And the value of -1 does nothing. However, if you wish for the results to transfer the item's properties and variables, attachments, and etc., then it will do so. So let's say I have my ingredients are both leather vests, right? Well, I can state that if I wanted my first ingredient, which is a leather vest, to transfer its stuff to my second ingredient, I would put this to 0. So what that means is that it will transfer all of the properties and everything else from 0 to the second thing. Now, this is only attachments, so all of my grenades and stuff would spawn on it, but my inventory probably would not. But I could combine them together to repair my one of my vests by using another vest. This is kind of you need to experiment with this. You need to make sure that you have this down right, because this can be really problematic for your players, and it can really mean that people lose a lot of their stuff. So try to make sure that you're very testing of this variable. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about what it means to have multiple results from a situation, from a recipe. Now, here we can see that we only have one result, the leather storage. But in reality, all I have to do if I want to have a secondary result is copy this. Now we're going to push enter. We're going to go, I'm going to put a thing here so you guys can see the differences. All right. All right, so let's go ahead and go like this. There we go. Now what I can do here is if I change all of these to 1, oops. Okay, now as you can see, all of these are set to 1, which means that this is the first result and this is the second result. Now this is not a OR statement. If I were to do this recipe, 2 leather storage _ natural vests would be spawned after I completed this recipe. And this can be very cool because you can do some really neat things. You can make it so this recipe is like, you know, craft basic ×2, right? And then you can make it so it consumes, instead of just 2 leather, it consumes 4 leather. And now the person gets 2 leather storage vests for 1 recipe action. And then you can set up the rest of it and improve upon everything else. So let's go ahead and cover the can-do situation. The can-do thing is the final check for the recipe, and you could do some advanced scripting here to make things really cool and really fun. However, right now, just do return true, and then the avoid do can also do other things like spawn in other items, set the quantities, so many more things, but it's also more advanced scripting. Now this is the basics of the recipe. So now we have covered how to do all the recipes, its variables, and how to utilize it pretty well. Let's go ahead and talk about how you register the recipes so people in game can actually use them. So inside of your for world, you can need to make a .c file. Now you can call it whatever you want. I like to call it the recipe generate.c. Well, let's go ahead and open that up. Now, as you can see here, we have our register recipe generate.c, and our first line is modded class plugin recipes manager. And then we have a override void register recipes. Then we have a super for it, and the super allows us to essentially say everything everything below this is a new addition to this void, so everything above it stays. And this is how multiple mods can have tons of recipes and not override each other's recipes and make them null and void. So here we have our on line 8, our register recipe new, and then we have craft cleaned pelt wild boar. Now the register recipe is us calling a function. The new is a variable in that function, and then the craft cleaned pelt wild boar is the class of the recipe. Now our recipe is not called craft clean wild boar. It is called, if we go over to our basic recipe, it's called craft basic recipe. So we can just copy and paste that in. Voila! Now our recipe, when we boot up the thing, should be registered. If it doesn't show up or you can't make it work, you need to go back to your basic recipe, and you need to find where maybe one of your checks or whatever is doing something wrong. Always double check stuff. Make sure you have the proper class names and everything else. If your recipe, class recipe is misspelt or whatever else, when you go to test this, it will tell you this recipe doesn't technically exist because it can't find the class for the recipe. And it's very easy to register the recipes. All you have to do is copy, paste this down, and you'd be all like, recipe first, right? And let's say you had a class called recipe first, or a new recipe called recipe first. That is how it works. So yeah, that is the basics of recipes and recipe management, registering, and everything else. If you wish to learn about how to use attachments to make your recipes a little bit more complex, then stay forward. So now we're going to go ahead and check our attachment check recipes. Now I'm going to be using one of my recipes for my mods, ammo making. It's called Assemble Press. Now the Assemble Press pretty much states that you have to have the press body, a wrench, and then the press body has to have these things attached. So if you were to look through this, and I'm actually going to scroll down slowly so you can pause this video whenever you want. And you can see I have my press body, my wrench, and then I have the result, which is a completed press at the very bottom. Now, if we go down here, you can see in my override bool can do, I have some other information here that wasn't in the basic recipe that we covered just a minute ago. So what I'm doing here is I'm stating item base, and then I'm creating a variable name to it. I'm assigning a variable name to item base. Then what I'm doing is I'm stating that the class is being cast to the variable name, which is ingredient 0, and ingredient 0 equals item base or represents item base. And then I say and with a comma, see, you can see the comma right there, and ingredients 0 in brackets. Now ingredient 0, as we know, is the press body, but if I wanted it to be the wrench, I would change this from 0 to 1. And now ingredient 0 down here would represent the wrench and not my press body. But I digress. Let's go ahead and change that back to ingredient 0. In reality, if I were going to change this to ingredient 1, I would change this to ingredient 1, and then I would change this to ingredient 1. And that way they all matched, right? But we're not going to do that, and I don't want to confuse you. So then we go if, this is a if check, ingredient 1, again, ingredient 1 is equal to the press body because we're fetching the press body. And then we go get attachment type. Get attachment type is a function that is used throughout DayZ and can be called in pretty much any script. It's inside of the item base class itself. And then what I'm doing here is I'm using brackets and I'm checking for the class I wish to check if it's attached. This checks if it's attached to the press body. As you can see here, I check for the press casing holder. And then I go and, you need to use 2 ands. And then I do it again, and I check for the press mount plate. And then I do it again, and I check for the press mechanism and handle. And if all of these attachments are on my thing, then I would do return true, which then enables the recipe to happen, which then allows the press body plus the wrench to make me my completed press. And it destroys all these ingredients because you can see here on line 32, I have it set to true. Now this may seem advanced to you, so let me go ahead and break it down. Let's say I only want the press casing holder or the press mechanism handle. Using these two up and down slashes, the two up and down slashes says or instead of and. So the attachment on my press body has to be either a press casing holder or a press mechanism holder to return true. Now this is how you can make it so your recipes can take more than one or two ingredients. This is how you can make it take 3 ingredients, 4 ingredients. The sky's the limit in reality. So this is pretty darn cool and very, very useful if you wish to make more complex or more complicated but yet more rewarding recipes for your players. Then we're going to, next up, we're going to be covering how to make a smart system. Alright guys, the final thing we're going to be covering here is what I call smart recipes. Smart recipes I kind of touched on with the whole armband and the color situation in the ingredients down here, where it says inherits color. The smart recipe is kind of an interesting situation. So smart recipes pull from your scripts, and as you can see here, as I'm going down, you can see I have ingredient 0, and it's the tip space, right? Now, in this smart thing, you can see in my override void do, I'm doing the same exact thing I did before. I'm saying that my AM tip space is ingredient 0. Instead of item base, I'm using my AM underscore tip space. And then I'm casting the AM tip space to ingredient 0, which is kind of like just pulling it from there, right? And then inside of here, I go float starting amount. Now I'm declaring the starting underscore amount myself. And then I am saying that ingredient 0 dot math addition. Now math addition exists inside of my AM underscore tip space, and it pretty much just says to return a number from that tip. So because, let's say, my 762 by 54 tips inherit off of AM underscore tip space, when I add my 762 by 54 tips to the crucible, it would then say, hey, ingredient 0, which is the tip space, which is technically the 762 by 54, math addition, and it pulls the number from there. That number can be anywhere from 0 to 500, right? And then it adds that quantity to, as we can see here, item base, result 1, and then that result is right here. So the crucible filled tips. And then it adds add quantity, and it adds the starting amount. Now this is all very complicated, but the thing here is I have in my ammo making, for every vanilla there is a tip. For every vanilla bullet there is a tip, right? Well, that's well over 25 tips. So using this system, I have one recipe that handles 25 other recipes that are possible using this one recipe. Now the reason why this matters is because there is a script limit in DayZ, and if you are trying your hardest and you know how to do scripting, you can use recipes very well with calls from the classes to fetch variables, floats, or ints, or even bools to make your recipes more smart and more advanced, so you don't register 45 different recipes when you can just register one and just have it pull from the classes that are in them already. And this is important. You can also even have it so your class, your script class, can pull from the Config.cpp, and then you can have your recipes check for that pull. That's obviously really advanced, but folks, I am very, very happy that you came here and watched this. And if any of you have any questions or things you guys would like me to cover, go ahead and put the comments down below, and I will talk to you folks next time.